Thank you, Mark. All right. In case Mark was going in and out for you, he's outdoors at a hotel and doing the best he can manage this. But I'm Nick Brown. I'm an energy consultant in Long Beach. And today we're going to focus on accessory dwelling units, although you may have seen some advertisements for this session that were still saying it was about single family all electric provisions of the energy code. That will not be what we talk about today. I hope no one's disappointed. We're going to talk about ADUs, which is a hot topic, and specifically how the energy code deals with them. Now, I've got an eye on the chat, so as you guys have questions, comments, please throw them in and we'll stop and deal with them. No need to wait till the end. And another question we often get, will we get a copy of the slides? Yeah, we'll provide a PDF of the slides at the end. Also want to mention, I'm a member of my local AIA chapter in Long Beach, South Bay. So hang out a lot with you architect types, and always exciting, interesting conversation. Today, we're going to talk about the 2022 Energy Code and how it provides specifically for accessory dwelling units and some of those sort of special challenges we encounter with getting ADUs built and meeting the energy code. This qualifies for one CEU, HSW, and that'll be granted by the AIA team. Code breakers are short topics in the energy code. And actually, this is not the 2019 version, it's the 2022 version that you see there, where we take larger offerings like our single family architects class that lasts for 2 days for 3 hours each day, and really distill them down to some of the most interesting tidbits. We have code breakers on solar and battery, code breakers on all electric, like many of you probably tuned in with my colleague Brian Selby last time. But we're really trying to expose as well the larger offerings, and hopefully you like the way we teach the energy code and show up for some of those larger offerings as well. So we're going to start with which ADUs are considered alterations, additions, and new construction, because that has a great deal to do with how difficult compliance is. We're going to talk about the envelope requirements, the renewable energy requirements, including solar, battery, where applicable, and the mechanical equipment requirements. Now, Energy Code ACE, if you're not familiar, is the one-stop shop, the state-funded resource to make your interactions with the energy code a little bit smoother. We have it broken down into tools like the virtual compliance assistant, which helps you fill out a prescriptive non-residential or multifamily form. Also Reference ACE, where you can search for any keyword and it'll pop up everywhere it appears in the code. Training like this, as well as the longer ones. And resources like fact sheets and trigger sheets. And we just completed actually a really detailed fact sheet on ADUs that would be great for you guys to go to energycodeace.com and download if you haven't already seen them. Now, before we start the official program, I wanted to throw in this slide. I taught a class on all electric ADUs for PG&E recently, and Casita Coalition supplied this slide. They're a well-known statewide advocacy group for ADUs. 63,000 ADUs permitted over the last few years. So we're up to 20% of new housing construction in the state of California being these small homes, these small ADUs. It's just a huge contribution, a huge contra to the affordability crisis, the homelessness crisis. So it makes sense that our state California Energy Code will do everything in their power to make ADUs a little bit easier to build. And that's why you'll see so many special exceptions in the Energy Code for small homes. The 2022 Energy Code started January 1st, 2023. So any projects you submit after that date will need to meet the new code. And there's a link to the CEC's site for more information on that. All of our Energy Code ACE classes break down the code into those mandatory provisions that always apply. Those are things like mechanical ventilation for health and safety, absolute minimum insulation levels, and the prescriptive and the performance parts of the code. Because every project can either comply via the prescriptive pathway or the performance pathway. With the prescriptive pathway being, you're going to meet every single one of the Energy Code standards without exception. And it's a simpler form, it's a simpler process. The performance approach allows trade-offs between those standards. So you might fall short on wall insulation, but be better than minimum on your HVAC system, for example. Just know that you've always got that choice between those two compliance pathways. And when you see these icons throughout our presentation, you'll know what we're talking about. Is it mandatory? Is it a prescriptive standard? Or is it the performance option? Now we have 16 climate zones in California, not to be confused with the national IECC climate zones that are also numbered. So, you know, every project starts with finding out what climate zone you're in. The prescriptive envelope and mechanical requirements differ by climate zone because the climate's different. Makes sense. And here is a snapshot of our ADU fact sheet, which I'd encourage you to download. I think it's 18 pages. So it really takes you through, honestly, it takes you through Energy Code compliance in general with an ADU as your sample project. It really sort of covers everything. EnergyCodeAce.com, Katerina. You'll go to resources and fact sheets, and you can search for ADUs, any other term, and download it. I'll also see at the end, if you've had trouble, I'll put a link in the chat. So we've got this training organized into challenges, the types of ADUs, envelope, renewables, mechanical, and next steps. So let's start with those challenges. Accessory dwelling units is what ADUs stand for. It means a complete dwelling unit, including cooking, sleeping, living space. It can be either attached or detached. It can be single family or multifamily building. And HCD has a useful handbook if you haven't already looked at it. And just if you're brand new to ADUs, which I doubt any of you are, but the state's doing everything they can to encourage building of housing, encourage building of ADUs, and they're trying to remove obstacles that local jurisdictions may have erected to construction of small homes. So they've systematically passed bills in the legislature that should make ADU building simpler. Also put a link in here to the CAL FIRE guidelines on accessory dwelling units. And know also, they're not all field built. There are a lot of companies now in California and the West in general building ADUs in factory. These are often governed by Title 25 rather than Title 24, a completely different set of energy standards. So as you work with ADUs on wheels, those that aren't more traditional and drop on a foundation like a stick built, you may find your local jurisdiction accepts Title 25 compliance documentation for energy, but I also find many require Title 24. So it kind of depends on your local jurisdiction. When there are verifications by HERS raters to be done to comply with Title 24, those need to be performed at the factory. So it really requires some planning by the ADU builder when working in factories. Certain challenges apply to ADUs that maybe don't always apply to larger homes. Property line limits, setbacks, height restrictions, local zoning requirements. Parts of the lot that you are practical for ADUs. You may be very limited on access to the sun, orientation for windows, available utilities. So it really means a lot more working with subs and builders and utilities to get these built than you might experience on an open greenfield lot. No surprises to any of you there, I'm sure. All right, so let's go through the types. I think you'll find this really helpful because the type of project defines the stringency of the code, with alterations easiest, additions a little bit tougher, and new construction ADUs the toughest of all. They're going to be held to the same stringency as an entirely new single family home. And you'll see that the Energy Code has made certain provisions to make ADUs a little bit easier to build with less stringent policies than they might otherwise. So let's start with an alteration ADU. I call these carve outs. You've got an existing home, conditioned space. That room to the north is probably a attached garage. And you're converting an existing conditioned space to an ADU, to a new dwelling unit. But it's already conditioned space, so it's an alteration. Just like if you converted a bedroom to a living room or moved a kitchen within conditioned space. And that's the easiest type of ADU to build, least stringent set of requirements. You might also take a 2-story house and turn the upper level into an ADU. Same thing, you're converting existing conditioned space. That's an alteration ADU. In the second example, we've got an existing dwelling unit that we're adding a new ADU onto. It's connected with interior walls. This counts just like a family room addition would. It's an addition ADU. You're not going to be required to meet the new construction code for such an attached ADU. An attached garage converted to an ADU also counts as an addition, because although that might have been existing space, it was existing unconditioned space. So we're adding conditioned space, and that makes it an addition ADU project, just like the last one. Here's another example of an addition attached onto the back side of the house. It's going to need to meet the same set of standards as the last two. And here's a new category. If you have an existing accessory building on the lot that you're going to convert to an ADU, you might think that's entirely new building, but the Energy Code allows you to treat that as an addition project as well. That would apply also to an existing accessory building like this storage building that you're adding on to. Just because you add on to it doesn't mean it has to be treated as new construction. It too can be treated as an addition. And you probably see a lot of these. An existing unconditioned garage, not attached to the main house now, detached garage, you can still treat that as an addition ADU. But if you're building an entirely new ADU, it's not a conversion of an existing structure at all, and it's detached from the main house, that's a new construction ADU. So we went through a lot of examples. This was the only one that needs to be treated as new construction. So the easiest way for me to keep it straight in my head is just remember entirely new and detached is new construction. Most other ADUs are additions, with the exception of those alteration ones. So hopefully that's helpful. As we like to do in all our Energy Code ACE classes, we stop and do some check your understanding questions, give you a chance to apply what you've learned. Please put in chat what you think the answer is. We've got on the left the existing floor plan of a single family home. On the right side is what's planned. What do you think? Is this an alteration, addition, or new construction ADU project? Right. Entirely new and detached, that's a new construction ADU, going to be subject to all the same standards as a new single family home. How about this one? We've got the existing home with an attached garage that we're converting to an ADU. What do you think that is? Yeah, the bees have it. Remember, this isn't an alteration because this was an unconditioned garage before. So it's an addition of conditioned space, therefore an addition. If that were existing conditioned space, the alteration votes would have it. Okay. And we got one more. We've got an existing garage. We're basically taking part of that garage, turning it into an ADU. Does that change your answer? No, still an addition ADU. Very good. Okay, so hopefully that helps. Let's look at the envelope requirements now that apply to ADUs, those alteration, addition, and new construction categories that we just went over. And as we said before, remember these mandatory measures apply to everything. Then we've got the prescriptive path, the performance path. We choose one. And in either case, we get a CF1R form documenting we comply with the energy code. That starts the whole process of compliance with the energy code by saying these are the features we're going to build, and these are the features that we've demonstrated meet the code. And then all the installation CF2R forms get filed, all the verifications by the HERS raters on things like mechanical ventilation and QII, if it's applicable, get filed. Those are called CF3Rs. So just realize that that CF1R form you develop or get from your energy consultant is just the start of the compliance process. Now, in an alteration ADU of any size, we're going to be required to meet these requirements. In climate zones 1 through 4, 6, and 8 through 16, if we are putting in an entirely new HVAC system, we need to insulate that ceiling to a minimum of R49. That's a new requirement in the energy code that has caused some heartburn among my colleagues, I can tell you. But their thinking is when you have access to that attic, you need to install that insulation at the ceiling plane or you'll never do it. So make sure you know that's there. In some of the climate zones 1, 3, 5, and 7, if you have R19 up at the ceiling, that's enough. You can leave it there. You're also required to seal that ceiling surface when the insulation's altered in 2, 4, and 8 through 16. Those include most of our Southern California climate zones, but not coastal 6 and 7. Yeah. And then cool roof is required in 4 and 6 through 15. Also a reach code in City of LA. You guys have probably noticed that. So these are the prescriptive standards for an alteration type ADU. If you don't meet these, you can use the performance method, of course. Maybe you fall a little bit short of some of these and make up for it elsewhere in your design. Is there a way to comply with the R49 with a combination? Well, no, that's a mandatory minimum. I believe. I'll get back to you on that. Certainly in the performance method, you're allowed all different combinations of ceiling and roof insulation to meet the prescriptive standards for the roof. above roof deck, under roof deck, vented, unvented. There's a lot of ways to go. Let me just verify that before we finish on whether that's mandatory or prescriptive, but I think that's a prescriptive requirement. On an addition style, Glenn's asking about cathedral ceilings. Yeah, when you have a cathedral ceiling, then that means your mechanical system's in conditioned space, so you're not subject to that attic insulation requirement. And there's an option C in the prescriptive table for single family, table 150.1-A, that sets the minimum ceiling insulation when you have your HVAC system in conditioned space, and it's much lower than when you have your conditioning system up in the attic. So there's every incentive for you to move that conditioning system into conditioned space, ducts entirely in conditioned space, and by doing so, you can make those cathedral ceilings work because they're really important to ADUs, right, Glenn? Really give you that feeling of space. When we do an addition style ADU, so that's the garage conversion, that's the attached ADU, and it's less than 700 square feet, we're going to be subject to these prescriptive standards: R38 with radiant barrier in the attic, R30 in 3, 5 through 7 with radiant barrier. That air sealing requirement isn't there. Cool roof, when your addition is over 300 square feet in those cooling dominated climate zones, that'll be triggered. And airspace below the roofing is part of that prescriptive assembly. So if you can't meet any of those requirements, that moves you to the performance method. If your addition is larger than 700 square feet, so let's say you're taking an existing 400 square foot garage, you're adding 400 square foot onto it for a total of 800 square foot ADU, that's going to be treated like new construction because it's an addition over 700 square feet. Air sealing. Air sealing means that that ceiling plane, it's not a HERS tested measure, but it does mean that that whole ceiling plane needs to be sealed to the best of your ability. So that's caulking all the joints, sealing any chases, you know, and I can see if I can put a reference to that code language in the chat for you at the end. I'm not surprised that that language may be new to some of you. Just made a quick note. Okay. In a new construction ADU type, entirely new, detached, we are subject to the new construction requirements. And in climate zones 4 and 8 through 16, as well as those addition ADUs over 700 square feet, that is R30 or R38 at the ceiling and R19 under the roof deck. That's called a high performance attic. It's still vented. The concept is that you've got your HVAC system up there. You want a lot of insulation at the ceiling, but you also want to insulate under the roof deck so that that mechanical system isn't exposed to extreme temperatures or as extreme temperatures. So this is the prescriptive standard for new construction. I'm sure you guys are used to it already. But the milder climate zones 1 through 3, 5 through 7 is just sealing R38 insulation with radiant barrier. Air sealing of that ceiling is required as part of QII. And as we said earlier, also triggered when you're doing an HVAC replacement up there in the attic. And cool roof in those climate, cooling dominated climate zones. Again, if any of these you can't quite meet the mandatory minimum and then go to the performance method. Note also there's a mandatory minimum amount of insulation now in the 2022 code under the roof deck. It's not much. It amounts to R2, R3, but leaving that roof deck completely uninsulated is not an option unless you're moving your ducts and mechanical system entirely in conditioned space and using option C for your attic. For more information, tune into our single family architect class, because this really is a lot to digest and you got to cover it to cover ADUs. There's a number of exceptions for walls that are ideal for ADUs and really designed to make ADUs a little easier to build. And they say, if you have an existing wall and you're leaving the existing siding on it, all the code's going to ask you to do is remove the interior surface, put as much bad insulation as you can fit in that existing wall. If it's 2x4, it's R15. If it's 2x6, it's R21. And that meets the code. Neither, you don't have to put rigid foam on that wall. Also, if it's an extension of an existing wall, the same holds true. So you can see in this picture here, this wall section here is an existing wall. So this is an extension of that wall. No rigid foam required. You just leave the same framing depth, insulate it the best you can, and that meets the code. Only in entirely new walls are those new wall standards going to apply. So that's helpful. Here are the new wall standards that are going to apply to an entirely new ADU or a new wall that doesn't qualify as an extension. In climate zone 6 and 7, the mild coastal ones, 0.065 U factor, which means 2x4, R15 plus R4 continuous. All other climate zones though, 0.048, 2x6, R21 in the cavity plus R5 continuous. And those mandatory minimums that apply are R13, 2x4, R20, 2x6. You can never go below those insulation levels on walls. Okay. So let's look at this example. We've got that converted accessory building scenario where we're adding on to it. You can see how the bottom portion is existing and that wall segment in the upper right is an extension, right? So all that's going to be required is the same thickness. If that's existing walls 2x4, this can be 2x4 R15, you meet the code. Same over here, but this wall is an entirely new segment that needs to meet the prescriptive standards, or if you don't meet it, you use the performance method and take a little hit on that. Let's move on to windows. You're going to find in scenarios like pictured here, this is an existing unconditioned garage, most likely. We're going to try to turn this into an ADU. But it counts as an addition because it's new conditioned space. And those windows that are existing in the old garage aren't meeting our current prescriptive standards. We have to model them as default if we try to keep existing windows in converted garage ADUs. And that disqualifies us from compliance in many cases. So the lesson is, when you're converting an existing unconditioned space to an ADU, you may have to change all those windows out, because the prescriptive standard for new construction, 0.30 U factor, is well below what you'll get for the default. And it needs to be NFRC rated with the sticker on it to take credit for the best NFRC rating. If you've got a window without a sticker, without an NFRC rating, it gets modeled at default, which are really bad numbers. There's also a mandatory maximum U factor that's a weighted average for the whole project. It used to be 0.58. It's now been brought down to 0.45. And aluminum glazing, non-thermally broken, often exceeds that U factor. So make sure that not only are you subject to those prescriptive standard 0.30 that you have to beat either via the performance method or the prescriptive method, but under no circumstances can your overall project window U factor drop above 0.45. So that's going to mean entirely unthermally broken aluminum may not be an option. Default certainly isn't an option. So keep those in mind. On the solar heat gain coefficient, 0.23 is the maximum prescriptive standard in most climate zones, except 1, 3, 5, and 16. Those are heating dominated climate zones where higher solar heat gain coefficient often helps compliance, keeps spaces more comfortable, reduces heating energy use. Notice there's also a certain amount of glazing in the prescriptive standards. 20% of conditioned floor area overall and 5% west facing. This too does not apply to 1, 3, 5, and 16. So you see ADUs, compliance with the energy code, just as complicated as single family homes. There's a lot to take into account, but we've tried to distill it down to those ADU common challenges in this presentation. So let's do an example. I'm going to take you in a case study. You're working with an energy consultant on an ADU conversion in climate zone 12. Your standard that comes out of the software that your energy consultant sends to you, you have to be under 184 TDV. Your proposed building's at 193. So you've got a compliance deficit of 9 points you need to make up to get into compliance. And on the left, we've shown you a menu of 5 options that can be combined. See what you would use. Of course, the 2 wall options can't be added, but the others can. What would you choose to get this project into compliance with a TDV impact of 9 or more? All right, Louis, quick out of the gate with the 2x4 R15 plus R4 continuous walls, triple pane windows, and cool roof. That would certainly do it. Yeah. 11.5 points for doing that. Anyone else? You guys staying away from high performance attics with under roof deck insulation? Glenn's not afraid of them. Okay, cool roof, high performance attic, done. Yeah. I get the feedback from my clients sometimes that getting the under roof deck insulation in a small footprint, especially with low slope roofs, can be difficult. But if you've got access to that underside of the roof deck during construction, it's really not tough. A&E. Yeah. Okay. Triple pane windows might be expensive, but that certainly does it. Yeah. Good answer. So you get the idea, right? You're choosing features that get you into compliance, working with your energy consultant. And I think we've got another example to apply it later as well. Let's look at what renewable energy is required for ADUs. And the brief summary is additions and alterations do not require solar panels. New residential buildings do. So those ADUs that qualify as new construction will trigger solar. But more on that in a minute. There is a really helpful exception in the new code I want to make sure you know about. So addition, alteration, ADUs, no solar required, but those new and detached ones do require solar. And we've got a new definition in the code now called SARA. And I think this improves on the old code. It says that the usable roof space that the energy code can require you to put solar on includes all of the roof that can structurally support a PV system, and the roof on any neighboring covered parking areas, carports, and other newly constructed structures. That applies a lot to new multifamily buildings. That second bullet, not likely to apply to many ADUs, right? But it defines a little bit more clearly what can be considered. And it says any roof area that gets less than 70% sun over the course of the year, as demonstrated using an approved CEC solar tool, can be excluded from consideration for solar. So that's going to happen on your north-facing roof. It's going to happen on roofs shaded by neighboring structures that are taller than them, roofs shaded by mature trees. So you can see how many of your ADUs that are being built around mature trees or in the shadow of neighboring multifamily buildings are going to be able to exclude some or all of the roof space from consideration for solar using a solar shading report. So make sure you know that. And when you add up the usable roof area, if it's under 80 square feet, no solar is required. That's deemed to be too small roof space to be cost effective, no solar at all. So you'll just need to submit with your plan set that solar shading report proving to the AHJ solar's not required for your project. New construction needs to be solar installed, Ali. Solar ready was 2 code cycles ago, but now all new construction projects need to have solar installed unless they qualify for an exception. Note that occupied roof decks are also specifically excluded from consideration. That may apply to some of your ADUs. Certainly applies to a lot of new multifamily buildings. And then roof area that's serving some other function, be it fighter access ways, could be mechanical systems on the roof. Those can also be excluded. So no solar systems required if you have less than 80 square feet of SARA. And here's the new exception. If the minimum solar size required, and this uses the prescriptive equation, you see the reference to it there, is less than 1.8 kilowatts, that's about 5 or 6 solar panels, no solar is required. So this happens at different square footage sizes for different ADUs in different climate zones. So I wish I could tell you that means 500 square feet and less doesn't require solar, but I can't. It's a more complicated calculation than that. But just know if that prescriptive amount is less than 1.8 kilowatts, no solar systems required. And that's a great exception for ADU builders. No, the ADU laws did not exempt. Oh, attached ADUs, yes. Attached ADUs are additions, so no solar required. Just the new detached ones where solar is required. There's also exceptions for snow loads. And if you install a battery storage system, the amount of solar required can be reduced by 25%. That applies to all single-family homes. So you can't take credit for existing solar panels to meet the solar requirement for a new ADU project. Needs to be additional, but you can add to existing solar system. It can be ground mount, roof mount, anywhere on the property. And there's also provision for community shared solar, although that concept is in its infancy and not very practical yet, but watch that space. There's also a new requirement for all new single-family homes to be battery ready. The vision is that batteries are rapidly coming down in price. They have a key role to play in the state's clean energy transition. So all new homes, while they're being constructed, while it's easy to get in the walls, need to be wired for a future battery storage system. So you have a choice. You either interconnect at the time of construction at least 4 circuits totaling 60 amps to a battery, or you provide for a future battery with a dedicated raceway from the main service to a sub-panel that supplies at least 4 circuits. So this is commonly called a critical load panel. And it needs to include the fridge, 1 lighting circuit, a sleeping room receptacle outlet, and 1 other circuit. Also part of this battery ready provision is that the main panel has to be minimum 225 amp bus bar rating. There's been a lot of heartburn over this bullet as well, because people read it to say, why would my ADU need a 225 amp panel? It's not going to need that much power. And you're right. Only the main panel on the lot needs to be this large. And it doesn't need to have 225 amps physically connected to it. It just needs to have a bus bar rating. If you shop for it on, Schneider.com or whatever, it needs to be capable of distributing 225 amps. So hopefully that, I know when I drilled down into that, it lessened my heartburn a little bit. You also need to provide sufficient space for a future battery storage system within 3 feet of the panel with raceways pre-installed. So hopefully this ends up applying mostly to your larger single family homes, and your AHJ look at a new ADU being added and says, as long as your main house panel is at least 225 amps, that ADU doesn't need to be. So let's do a check your understanding question. Yes, any ADU addition is exempt from PV. Yeah. So how about this example? Will this ADU be required to add solar? Luis, quick out the gate already. Yeah, good job, you guys. Yeah, unless, of course, the prescriptive equation says less than 1.8 kilowatts would be required, in which case an exception applies. Unless you have less than 80 square feet of SARA, in which case an exception applies, right? And if that was a conversion of an existing accessory building, that would be an addition project, no solar required, right? But I think it was reasonable to assume that was new. How about this one? PV required here? Good, you guys are really getting it. Yeah, that's an addition only ADU scenario. When does the 2022 Energy Code mandate the installation of battery systems? Did you hear me say that? Right, Dwayne, I didn't say that. The code doesn't require installation of battery systems. It merely requires new homes to be built battery ready. Now, I can't say never, but at least the 2022 code is not requiring that. Let's move on to mechanical systems. We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about ventilation, heating and cooling, and water heating. Have you guys seen this new table? This is, yes, thank you, Glenn. Span panels, do battery ready and critical load panels, and the CEC has clarified that those should qualify the ESS ready provisions. Although I wish it were better defined in the code language. This new table sets out the minimum airflow in a kitchen range hood. And what's new this time is there's less airflow required for electric ranges than gas ranges, because gas ranges produce additional pollutants that electric ranges don't. Although electric ranges do produce moisture and VOCs that need to be vented, but not as much. No NOx, no SOx that you're going to get off natural gas. So this table defines how many CFM are required. And the other variable is the floor area of the dwelling unit. So smaller dwelling units require more airflow. That's kind of contrary to what you might think, huh? But you see the same amount of pollutants come off a cooking surface. And if it's distributed widely in a big house, that they're less concentrated. But if they're concentrated in a small dwelling, they need to be vented faster. So here you see your ADUs are going to need more airflow than larger custom homes. And you can comply either with capture efficiency or CFM. So to me, this table should make its way into your plan sets. Another change for 2022, and you learned all about this if you tuned in for Brian Selby's talk last time, we've added a source compliance metric in 2022 that we never had before. That's a proxy for carbon emissions. So if you deviate from the prescriptive design and you put more gas in your building than the standard building has, that source EDR metric's gonna suffer. And you may find you ending up at the heat pump construction design, if where that's applicable to your climate zone. So now and we'll talk more about that in a minute. All three of these compliance metrics need to be in compliance to get your permit. Efficiency, like we've always had, total, which takes into account the PV, the solar system, and now source, which is a proxy for carbon emissions. EDR, though, only applies to new construction projects, not to additions and alterations. No solar is required, so no EDR is required of those. They just have to meet efficiency standards. So there's an example. Okay, let's get to mechanical systems. In heat pump water heaters are prescriptively required just about statewide, you can think about it, except in 3, 4, 13, and 14. Maybe some of you work in 14 out of AIA LA. Some of you in 13, maybe too, although 3 and 4 are probably getting a little far. In those climate zones, if you have a heat pump for space conditioning, you're allowed a gas tankless water heater still. 3 zones, a heat pump water heater is prescriptively required. Now, ADUs here. New dwelling units, square feet, use distribution, and that's a HERS verified measure. It means your water heater is close to the points of use, the fixtures, as measured by a formula. So that's a useful one when you don't have space for a heat pump water heater tank. And also, most heat pump water heaters are 240 volts. To use 120 volt pump if your dwelling unit is 1 bedroom or less. You're also allowed to share a water heater with the main house, Glenn, absolutely. Although you're not allowed to share an HVAC system with the main house because dwelling units are required to have dedicated return filters. They don't want the air mixing between two families in an HVAC system. And we have 14. So in the orange climate zones, heat pump water heater prescriptive standard, gas furnace okay, heat pump okay. Blue climate zones, heat pumps prescriptive standard, gas tankless okay, heat pump water heater okay. And these prescriptive heat pump requirements don't apply to additions and alterations. There's also new federal minimum heating and cooling efficiencies. If you haven't heard of this, the SEER 2 HSPF2 transition, it's already in place. So you should be specifying equipment that meets these new standards I'm not going to go more into them than that. Just make sure you're specifying and installing equipment that's up to the new federal standard. Now, the most helpful button that an energy consultant can push on an ADU project is this one. And it's designed for ductless mini split heat pumps. It's called VCHP, and it ends up being a 10% compliance credit, recognizing that these ductless mini splits are extremely efficient, and boy, are they perfect for ADUs, right? One head, two heads, maybe three heads in a 2-bedroom, and you're done, all tied to one outdoor unit. To meet it, every zone 150 square feet or more has to have its own indoor unit and thermostat. And you have to have wall-mounted thermostats, not the remote controls. So it's a pretty easy one to meet. Now, for ducted mini split heat pumps that allow you to do away with the high wall units, the hurdle's a little bit tougher. They need to be listed on the CEC's directory of compliant VCHPs. They need to be low static pressure, etc. A little tougher to make it work there. Also, Brian would have covered this. There's electric ready provisions that apply to all new and addition ADUs on water heating, all new ADUs on furnaces, cooktops, and dryers that say basically, if you're installing a gas system, you need to run all the lines for a future electric conversion, electric retrofit at the time of installation. So make sure you're aware of that. Okay, here's that other example. This is a conversion from an existing garage, so an addition only project again. In this example, we're 12 points short of compliance. Which of these upgrade options from the mechanical section of our presentation do you think you'd choose to make up that deficit? A vote for heat recovery ventilator and condensing gas tankless. Yep. A vote for the VCHP. Absolutely. So you get the idea, right? Love it. Well, let's tie up by saying this is a very quick, and it probably felt a little bit too quick in places, treatment of a complicated energy code. But hopefully there were some really useful ADU takeaways like wall extensions and the PV exception and the exception for electric tankless water heaters in small 500 square feet ADUs. Which ones are additions, which ones are new constructions. But we'd love to see you at some of our longer offerings like the residential architect class that I teach about once a quarter. Also check out energycodeace.com where you'll see what's new in 2022 classes. You'll see our codes and coffee series where you can work with Brian Selby usually on modeling a project. All the tools we have like our FAQ tool called Q&Ace and the fact sheet on ADUs. Also encourage you to go sign up for an account. We won't spam you, but we will send you an email that's relevant to what you do. So that gets us to the end with only a few minutes left. You see my contact information there. Thanks to Gina for helping me put this class together, and Dave from SCE who sponsored this class, as well as the rest of the Energy Code ACE team. And we do have a course evaluation survey. I think that'll be sent to you in a follow-up email, but love to get your feedback on the course. So let me stop sharing there. Are there questions? And I don't know if Mark's back. Yeah, it's windy. All right.
Just one question. Can you please put your contact info back up?
Yeah, sure. Okay, if I put it in the chat.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, there you go. Any particular ADU challenges anyone want to bring up? Well, okay, Ali's got a good question. What are the typical performance trade-offs you see? Yeah, it's often a little less wall insulation, a little more efficient HVAC system, or heat pump water heaters give a nice credit. So you can use that to avoid high performance attics. Windows, if someone wants aluminum windows to match the main house, that's a compliance hit. So you're going to need to make up for that with something like a heat recovery ventilator or a battery storage system. So hopefully those two exercises we did, helped you understand that process. Thanks, Dwayne. We'd love to see you. Are there good checklists for our working drawings? On energy, Glenn, is that what you're asking? Yeah. The building plan checkers have their checklists. You guys get their feedback back, but I don't know of an energy checklist for architects. That would be a good idea to develop. And one of my architect clients asked me for that when this code cycle started, and I still haven't got to him, but he wanted a list of key things to put in the plan sets, like that kitchen range vent hood table, and just those key pieces of the code that would be good to reproduce in the plan set, so the subs can't say they never saw it, and things go smooth in the field. Okay, Ashley or Ashel, the prescriptive standard for new construction walls is to have continuous insulation outside the studs. But you can build with 2x6 R21 wood framed walls with no continuous insulation. It's just you're going to take a hit on the performance method calculation for the walls. You need to make up elsewhere. So that's how the performance method works. You couldn't comply with a new construction project via the prescriptive method without continuous insulation, right? Because that doesn't quite meet the standard. So that's going to bump you to the performance method where you can do all those trade-offs. There's a bunch of classes that you might find helpful at Energy Code ACE, like the basics for energy consultants, where you learn more about those trade-offs. Encourage you to take them. Any updates to the, that's the ground fault, I think, GFCI breakers? Not in the energy code, but that may be in the electrical code. Sorry, Luis, I don't have the answer for you on that. And I'm going to go look up those air sealing and ceiling insulation standards for whoever wants to hang around, if that's okay, Mark.
That is okay, yes.
All right, cool.
I'll hang out, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Jesus.
In climate zones 2, 4, and 8 through 16, air seal all accessible areas of the ceiling plane between the attic and the conditioned space, unless you've already got R19 existing insulation at the ceiling, unless you have atmospherically vented space heating or water heating combustion appliances in the dwelling unit. So that's the language. Air seal all accessible areas of the ceiling plane. And then we wanted to look at the ceiling alteration, right? Few people still holding on, thank you. Vented attics, climate zones 1 through 4, 6 and 8 through 16. Weighted factor of 0.020 or insulation at the ceiling resulting in an insulated thermal resistance of R49 or greater. Yeah. So that is a prescriptive standard, not a mandatory minimum. Did that prompt anything else, guys? No? Okay. Well, thanks so much for being here. Thanks, Mark. We'll see you next time.
Thank you again, Nick. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
All right.
Okay.
I'll be in touch
Bye.
with you. Thank you.